see, I take a little bit of an approach like I know everybody likes the fact that Franz left and wrote that book, but I can't help but think my mind says, why did he leave?
Hey everyone, my name is Jake, and today we have a really special and exciting interview on the show with a current member of Jehovah's Witnesses. So please be kind in the comments. Obviously, due to the organization's stance on members talking with critics, he is going to be anonymous. We're not going to show his face, you'll just hear his audio, and he's going under the name Russell. Who else? So please welcome Russell.
Hey, Jake.
Hey, thank you so much. I apologize. I forgot to say thank you for coming on when we were talking.
Oh,
Hey, so I wanted to just hop in and give a content warning of sorts. Basically, I definitely clickbait titled this because I want people to actually watch it, but I would not say that what you're about to watch is a debate per se. For the first half of the conversation in particular, I really try and let Russell talk as much as possible and get his backstory. I really want this to be the groundwork for more interaction between active witnesses and XJWs on the internet. Anyway, my goal of this conversation wasn't to change Russell's mind or to challenge him on every little thing. I really wanted to lay a groundwork so that in the future we can have those more back and forth conversations. So I hope you will listen to the conversation, but I would not necessarily classify it as a debate, though we definitely have some more back and forth challenging questions towards the back end of the interview. No, this is really, really cool. So I put out a video recently, and at the end of it, I kind of just put out the word like, hey, if you're a witness and would be willing to talk to me on the channel in some way, let me know. And a couple people actually did, but you were the first. So thanks for reaching out.
yeah, no problem.
So how did you get to the point where, because you are a current member, right?
In
But
really good standing, exemplary, I guess they call it. In fact, very close to being an MS. They just started talking about that with me. So
oh, great. Okay, so you're a proper publisher then.
I am.
Okay, good deal. Well, good deal, and also shame on you for talking
I
about
know.
you. No, but that's great. And you, when you emailed me, the language you used was you're kind of lukewarm incognito, like to the organization, which I liked that phrase. I hear a lot of people talking about how it seems like a lot of witnesses right now are sort of like physically in, mentally apathetic,
Right.
not necessarily like out or questioning or anything. So I guess to help us figure out where you're at right now with the
Yeah.
organization before we get into your backstory too much.
Well, I don't, I guess in reality, where I'm at is I don't view myself as completely mentally out or, just basically going through the motions. I do believe in God, and
Okay.
uh, I kind of by default through. I was raised at JW, so in fact, I was raised by uh, elder father and pioneer mother. My dad was uh, before they were coordinators, they were called presiding overseers, and
Right.
so
Right.
yeah, and so I was raised in a very JW household, and did all the JW things. I was almost an MS when I was actually 18, 19. My father held me back at the time. The body wanted to make me an MS, and he said I wasn't ready. And man, I couldn't be more thankful he said that at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and in truth, what happened is I ended up starting to go do the career thing, and I went to school. All things JW shouldn't. I became an architect, and you know, just did a lot of things that again, I kind of got cold, left the truth, if you will, or left the
Sure.
organization just through passive disassociation. And then I came back a little bit later, and especially right after I got married, and then my wife became a pioneer, and I just got a little bit more active. But I would say
Is your wife, if you don't mind me asking, was your wife a witness before, or did she kind of take?
she was also raised. It was basically
Okay.
her father was an elder, and her mom was a pioneer, and
Oh, gotcha.
it's one of those things, right, where you're almost a match is made by the status of
Yeah.
parents in some sense.
Circumstance and all that.
Yeah. So yeah, and ultimately, then I did get disfellowshipped, and I know you want to ask me about that, but primarily I'd say I'm not primo, but I'm definitely not. I'm not so tied in with the organizational views that I think, oh, they're absolutely right about everything, and
Okay.
yeah. So
Interesting. Are you kind of the opinion that they're like at least like the best religion to be a part of, or not
yes, in
even that
fact,
close?
you
Okay.
you hear that colloquial cringe, what is it? The best or the
Yeah, the
best.
most perfect
There it is.
imperfect. Yeah.
It, you
Yeah.
know, and what's funny about that, I don't think anybody actually thinks that way, really. When they say it, right? You read those old
Yeah.
watchtowers where it's like where one prophecy would be changed or adjusted, and everybody say, "Well, where else would we go?" Trying to mimic what Jesus or his apostles said to him over the blood issue. But in reality, if you really break those down, both comments, it's kind of like if you really thought that, then you definitely wouldn't attribute what you do to the organization, right? Because
Yeah.
I think if they actually came out and said, "Hey, we're the best best imperfect organization out there," and we are who we are, I actually think they'd get a much better reception than kind of the hybrid. We're
I do too. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah, because they
and
don't like claim divine revelation in the sense that like they don't claim that like Jesus talks to them like one on one,
but what
but
else
it's
is it?
also like
But hold on, that's funny you say that. See, and I think through this discussion you'll see where I
yeah,
I might deviate, but it's kind of like there's spirit inspired, right? Or scripture inspired. Spirit, what
right.
does that mean? I mean, if not,
Yeah, not they say like they're not inspired, right? They say they're neither inspired nor infallible, but they're like guided by the Holy Spirit. And it's a little it always seemed to me a little arbitrary as to what the difference between like being inspired and being led by the Spirit is.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
anyhow, yeah, but so
Yeah, well,
that's that's
interesting.
why I use the term lukewarm, lukewarm to their um, who they are, their claims. But
That's
I definitely am a strong believer in God, and again, you kind of back into it, right? I mean, I think it's why a lot of XJ dubs don't actually often find another religion because you've been taught all their life about things like the Trinity and hellfire. I mean, what am I going to do? Go into
right.
some other church organization and start believing that people are going to burn forever? And
Right. Yeah.
it just,
Like I
it,
left the witnesses and I really started to like the idea of hell. That started
yeah,
to really
yeah,
appeal to me.
yeah.
Yeah.
When you start checking off those boxes, there's just you kind of get defaulted and de facto to one organization.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I understand that. There was a ex-Mormon person I would watch, and he would kind of say something similar, like when you've been raised to think that like every other religion other than your own is
yeah,
terrible, once you realize that the one true religion is also terrible, you don't really
yeah,
have anywhere else to go.
yeah,
Butchering the way he said that. But
yeah.
that okay, so maybe if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of ask where you're at with what your disagreements are or what is causing you to be more like disconnected.
I think when I remember as a child growing up, my mother used to saying to me all the time, "I don't even know who the governing body. I couldn't even name but one governing body member," or and then you'd see some Christian rock band on on TV and go, "Oh, JWs, they're just Joe's Witnesses. We're all about just teaching people the Bible, and you know
Right.
our ministers aren't getting up in front of the television camera and all." I
Yep,
think
I remember all that too.
yeah, and I think overall it just like if I could go back to her, I'd say, well, give it 100 years, or give it 50 years, give it 20 years.
Yeah. Right, like, oh,
Yeah,
just you wait.
yeah, and
This
I guess
generation will by no means pass away before
yeah,
you see
yeah.
the governing body on
No,
TV.
yeah, and that's even another issue. Um, but overall, I just think if I had to say it in a nutshell, is like just the way that the governing body is kind of shaped up to be what they are, and it's just this weird mix of weird doctrine with, like we just talked about, or scripturally led, or whatever the term they're using nowadays. And then the authority that they pose on people, and now that they're um, I hear it all the time at meetings and conventions. And it used to be just the organization is doing this, or the organization is this, or Bethel's doing that. And now
Yeah.
it's very specifically governing body. The governing body has approved this. The governing body has approved that. The
Yeah.
governing body has decided this. And then when you even think about the term governing body, a corporate term, that has no,
Yes.
you almost throw out what Jesus said about don't call anybody leader. It's like, I mean, here we come up with
Hmm.
terms like elder or ministerial servant or pioneer, all these terms that have been crafted to not denote this hierarchy. And then for some reason they just get to governing body and let's just throw that out the window, and man, we're gonna we're gonna go in, we're
Yeah.
governing everybody. And now we have a new title. We're calling bishops governing body helpers, bishops or cardinals. It's kind of like
Yeah, that's true. That really
they didn't
is.
even come up with they didn't just call them helpers.
Yeah.
They're
Governing
governing
body
body
helpers.
helpers.
Yeah, that's true.
And I just honestly, they kind of testify against themselves. So that's the reality of
Yeah. That's really interesting. And that's like obviously something that I noticed as well. And it was almost like one of those things where I looked around and realized like I feel like something's different. What's different? Like you just realize like how much things have changed in
it.
a
Yeah,
seemingly short amount of time.
the last 15 years, 10 years. I mean, it's changing
Yeah.
rapidly. So
The chariot is you got to keep up with it. All of these off-putting aesthetic changes
yeah.
is the chariot. Yeah, so that's interesting. So what do you agree with? So would you say like doctrinally, like their interpretation of the Bible, you largely agree with?
I do. Yeah. With some minor adjustments, I'd say, I think I saw a video you put out talking about different things that aren't in the Bible, and I think the issue of
Oh yeah, that yeah.
who's going where, right? I mean, I think it's a little murky. I think the Bible definitely talks about the idea that there be something here. There's a redoing of the earth in some way, but if you were really to read the Bible as it's written, you'd get definite sense that you're going to heaven, But that to me isn't a huge deal. I mean, if there is a reward, it does. I mean, it feels like a silly thing to argue about.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a good point.
but
It's an afterlife. What do you
yeah,
care
yeah,
what it
as
is?
long, yeah. And then if it's not right, then I guess I won't think about it. The but overall, I'd say strong things like the Trinity. Right, I spent a lot of time studying the Trinity and hellfire and all the more basic dogmas that other churches really hold true. I feel like I watch a lot of Bart Ehrman. Do you know who?
Oh yeah,
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 I love Bart Ehrman, and I dabbled with the trying to before I came back. I was looking into atheism and Dawkins and all that. Just I did a lot of things
sure.
that
So you've done your due diligence
I
to a
did.
degree. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's really interesting to me. So I've talked with somebody with another witness, and they're in a kind of a similar um, space. It's of sort of like they also left for a while, did a fair amount of research, but still came back with
Mhm.
perhaps you have a more nuanced view than the other person I talked to. But um, what kind of led you out in the first place? Because you did include in your email, you have a really interesting disfellowshipping story, and
Yeah.
you have a thing that I've actually never heard of uh, happen. So I'm kind of interested to hear what your experience is.
So we get my wife and I were having some issues, newly married,
Sure.
and we got a shepherding call. And in that shepherding call, she was a pioneer, full time pioneer. And in that shepherding call, there was a little bit of we aired out a little too much. We were young, we didn't know.
Ah.
So, I definitely would do things different today.
Sure.
If I even accepted one. But anyhow,
Right. Yeah.
but anyways, I kind of aired out a little too much, and in it, um, it was revealed that my choice of words was not ideal or adequate. I did use language that I shouldn't have used.
Like
And
cursing
cursing,
or
yeah,
like
yeah, just
Spanish? Okay,
in general, normal
gotcha.
arguments. I didn't say something horrid, but it just was like, I used curse
Yeah.
words a couple times. A few times, in fact, I think it was brought down to about 6 times.
Oh, okay. So it was like you could
That I
count
can
the amount
remember,
of
yeah.
time. Okay.
And she had done just enough to where they were removing her as a pioneer at the time. And I remember her being
Oh.
told that she had just finished a year and she was looking forward to going to school. And they said you could go do it. And then
Oh,
they looked
yeah.
at me, and there's this guy, a particular elder, which I did not get along with at all. He's not an elder today. And he looked at me with the most satisfied look, and he said, "And what are you doing on Sunday afternoon?" And I just was like, I guess after me, I don't know, just coming back. He goes, "Well, we have a couple, we have some men and brothers. We're going to meet with you, and just so you know, we started a judicial committee." And I'm like, "What?" I wasn't. It wasn't even in my mind, right?
Yeah, right.
And and I remember saying, "Well, what did I do?" And he said, "Well, it's for abuse of speech." That was the
Oh,
official thing. And I said, "That's interesting." And keep in mind, it's not like I was abusively speaking to my wife only. That's one of the reasons she was taken off the pioneer list is we had some couple fights and we said some things that we should anyhow.
gotcha. So it's just you're just like saying like, "Ah, god damn it," or,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
something, but you're not like,
exactly.
yelling
Calling her. Yeah,
insulting.
no, it's
Yeah,
not
okay.
directed toward. It's just
Yeah, yeah. I
these
understand.
times, anyhow. So at any rate, they formed a judicial committee, and my father was an elder at the time, and he highly um, in that congregation in particular, and he was like, "What?" And
Yeah.
so at any rate, but I went through it, and
Do you think he said, "What the
yeah, yeah.
what the hell are they
My
doing,
friends are
these
pretty
elders?"
cool, to be honest. So yeah,
Nah.
they're anyhow. So and so in the meeting, it was kind of like it was hard to be super repentant for something that you're surprised you're even there.
Yeah.
It was a weird mix where I was going in there like, what do you do? What is this? And
Yeah, like, is this like a test or
so
something?
I wasn't like breaking down crying because I had sinned and all this kind of things, typical things that you would expect or they would expect to see from someone that was quote repentant.
Right.
And so ultimately they met with me 3 times, which took a while. Yeah, that was interesting. It wasn't just one time, and it was kind of like,
Yeah. That's how it was with me.
and so they told me they were going to disfellowship me, and then they told me about the appeal process, and I said, well, okay, I think I want to do that, and so filed my appeal letter, and then they
Can I stop for a second and just this is actually something I don't think I've ever talked about on the channel before. So I just wanted to, say if there's anybody watching who's never been a witness, like there is a time period where when the elder body meets with you and they decide that you're disfellowshipped, they're like, you have, I don't remember how many days it is, but I think you have like
the
7 days
week.
to
Yeah.
um, appeal your decision. And then essentially what happens is like another totally separate elder body
Mhm.
from a different congregation, or maybe different congregations are brought together to re-examine the case. Um, but the appeal process is kind of notorious for being a complete joke because it's like all they're trying to determine is not whether or not they think you are repentant, but whether or not the previous elder body followed the rules or not. And then even if they thought that the previous elder body messed up, the previous elder body could like veto it anyway and say, well, we think we did a good job, so we're just going to hang on to that rule. That's my understanding, and I might be wrong.
No, yeah, you're
So if
about
there's
right.
any, if there's any former elders in the comments that want to correct me on that, but that's my understanding of how the appeal process works. But obviously, as a witness, you wouldn't necessarily know that it's like some rigged process. You'd think, well, yeah, I want to appeal my decision.
Yeah. So I gave him my letter, and then a couple weeks later, took a while for some reason. But another body, like just everything you just said, came, and I think the CO had to get involved and set a date or something.
Oh, okay.
I got a little bit more information than I normally would have, only because my father was part of the body, and so there
Right.
was a certain amount of inside information I had on the process. But anyhow, um, so the other body came, and we had a one. It was only that was only one day, but it was it was a good 3 hours. And I had brought lots of friends who could testify on my behalf and just say that I
Oh,
don't really
really?
speak that language. Yeah, they allowed. Yeah, it was. And so we went through that, and had me come outside just like the first time. Then they had me come back in, and they said, I apologize, we're not going to be able to make a decision here today. Da 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 da. We'll be in touch with you in about a week. And so a week went by, and I found out that they still hadn't had a formal decision. Well, my father is a business associate of the chairman of the
Mm.
of the appeal committee, and he had told me, or he had told him that I had won my appeal. And then later, I found that out from them. But what happened was the circuit overseer initially didn't like that, and so he had the two bodies meet again and see if they could hash it out
Mm.
because he wanted a unified decision, and they still couldn't hash it out. And
That's
I know. That's why. Yeah. Anyhow, and so what ended up happening is the original body appealed. I didn't even. This is the part I didn't know, and I would venture to say my father didn't know
Mm.
that the original body appealed the overturning by the second body, and so they appealed to the governing body, Bethel at the time,
Yeah.
and so the whole thing. Everybody wrote letters, and the letters went back to Bethel, and we didn't hear from them for 6 months.
Wow. Okay, so for 6 months, you're kind of in limbo then,
Yep.
huh?
Uh-huh.
Are you
And
allowed to comment or anything during
yeah,
this time?
no restrictions or anything like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so at any rate, I didn't though. I was
Mm.
nobody. How about this? Nobody told me that I couldn't, and I
Ah.
just didn't. Just because it
Gotcha.
was odd, right? I mean, I just
Yeah, you were probably a little disillusioned and
yeah.
confused. Yeah.
So at any rate, then I had the 6 months goes by, and they finally got back, and the society did agree to disfellowship me. So over the issue of the language. However, they put a caveat on it. They said that all that because they felt bad about the 6 month period, and they said that I could be qualified for reinstatement within a couple months
Oh.
if I
That
so
counted towards your time.
it did.
You're
It did. And so I was reinstated. It wasn't 2 months, it was like 3 or 4, but it wasn't like I had to wait a whole lot. It wasn't like
Yeah. You didn't have to wait a year
yeah,
or
yeah.
yeah. Wow, that is that's really weird. That's
Then
probably the pettiest thing I've heard somebody get disfellowshipped over.
yeah. No, it
I mean,
was
I'm
yeah,
sure there have been elders meetings where elders have cursed during the meeting.
yeah, yeah. No, and honestly, that just put kind of a bad taste in my mouth, and I ended up kind of,
Yeah.
beating out again and just focused on other things. But anyhow, yeah, it was an interesting experience. It was very, very unique.
That is a very unique experience. And so at this point you're married then.
Yes.
And so what is your marriage like during that time? Because I know what it's like to be a disfellowship person with a spouse who is not.
Right.
But I was obviously they would consider an opposer. So it was, it was different. I was not working to try to come back or anything like that. So what was that like for you?
Actually not too bad. I think the way that it all played out was maybe a little differently. My parents didn't adhere to the
Mm,
fellowshipping. My mom even was staunchly just saying, because there was kind of this two sides of it, right? There was just it was
yeah.
a little more visceral because of what had happened, that I think some people were like, just like my wife and my parents just were like, oh, this is ridiculous. So um,
Yeah, yeah.
they kind of
They knew the inside scoop.
yeah, and so it was a pretty smooth, few months, couple months, well, about 4
Good.
months. And in fact, it's so funny because there was this time where my wife was in the hospital, and the elders came, and the coordinator pulled me aside and he said, "We're just going to act like you're not disfellowship while we're here. It's just going to be temporary."
I'm temporarily lifting the shun.
Thank you.
Means nothing. I need you to do something for me.
I And I just was
Okay.
like, because we were all in the same hall. It was just weird because the way we were talking. It just, you know, it
Yeah,
was very,
like, hey, can we just pretend like these rules
yeah,
are silly and don't matter?
yeah. It was a very, yeah, very
Because
surreal.
this is completely arbitrary.
Yeah. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, but
That's really interesting. So is it during this time that you start to maybe like look at some content online or read some books or
yeah,
something, or is that different? Okay.
and I will say this: I started. I think the first thing that I started doing is I started reading. Oh, he's either Swedish or Norwegian about the Gentile times
Oh
revisited.
yeah, Carl Olaf Johnson, the
Yeah,
Gentile Times Reconsidered.
reconsidered. Yeah. So and started reading a bunch of things and started watching. You know, the John Cedars. I started watching his YouTube channel and went through a whole kind of a searching period, a secondary searching period.
How long ago was this, by the way?
So, well, so now I'm talking about a period. It's not like, so we're kind of jumping around 10 years at a time. You know,
Oh, okay.
all this stuff. Yeah, I mean, because I faded back out after I got reinstated, and then that's when I did more
Oh,
of the
okay.
research before I decided to come back in a big way. You know, just
Gotcha. I'm sorry. So I confused the timeline a little bit.
okay. No, you're fine. Yeah. Um, and you know, and I even got into some chats with Lloyd, I guess it is.
Yeah, I guess. I don't
Where I,
know.
you
I
know,
don't
some
know
of
him
the
very
things I
well.
agree. I obviously agreed with a lot of things he was saying, but I disagreed with some other things he was saying. And he and I had some long chats back and forth.
Okay,
And
interesting.
yeah, and then I started going down the whole. I looked into, you know, I looked at atheism arguments. I looked at all sorts of different things. Anthony Flew was another really. He was kind of the Dawkins of his time, who then right before he died, he converted back into a Christian. Um,
Oh, okay. I don't think I know this person.
yeah, he was pretty fun. Yeah, Anthony Flew. I think he published a book entitled "Don't Go." It's, I mean, I mean, exactly. There is no God, and then right before he died, he published a book. There is a God, or something. To that
Published a book
effect.
called like, "Oops, wait, hang on a second."
Yeah. But he was an Oxford guy with Dawkins, I believe.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, just did a lot of soul searching and
So,
research, and I read a lot of apostate material. Yeah. What's it
oh
called?
wow. Okay.
Oh
So
yeah, maybe I could
you
get
read
more.
like Crisis of Conscience
Oh yeah,
and
a few couple times. But see, you know, it just it's funny you say that because see, I take a little bit of an approach like I know everybody likes the fact that Franz left and wrote that book, but I can't help but think my mind says, why did he leave? He would have been
oh,
the most senior governing body member had he been slightly more, you know, reserved
like
about the
discreet
way he
about his.
approached it. He could have changed it for everyone. And I just
Interesting. Okay, so you kind of. Well, I mean, he would have been outnumbered. I guess I don't know how he would
no,
have
no,
done
no,
that.
no, but he was the youngest governing body member when he joined the government.
Yeah. Hmm.
He would have been the heir apparent. Because keep in mind, when he joined the governing body, it wasn't the governing body as we know it today.
Right. Yeah. He was there
It
during the
was
transition to
Nor
what we know
was the
now.
president, then his uncle was the president, and the governing body was
Right.
kind of like supporting role, if you will.
Yeah.
And it just would have happened. Now, I'm not saying the transition between, you know, presidency of and having that authority to governing body and having that authority, that probably would have still occurred. But at some point, he would have been in a fantastic position to bring on a governing body member or two that was slightly more. Um, I'm trying to think of a word that won't offend anybody.
Like liberal or
Liberal.
nuanced
There you go.
or
Yeah,
yeah.
slightly more liberal.
I don't care about
Yeah, that's right.
offending people.
Anyhow, and quite frankly, could have started to push that needle. Yeah, it would have taken some time, but if he had the strategic thought to do that,
Interesting.
I
I'm
actually
putting pins in these things. I'm not going to jump
okay.
on everything you're
Yeah,
saying,
yeah,
but that's
that's
okay.
fine.
That's interesting though. That's an interesting perspective because you know, reading that book myself, I'm like, wow, how could you still be a witness after you read all this stuff? And I hadn't thought of the perspective of like, why didn't he fight for this harder when he was in? And then
Yeah,
like,
yeah, he had reached the top of the summit. So,
okay,
and I want to
okay,
say that's another strategic thing that I think of myself. Meaning, I think as I become an MS, an elder someday, I'll be in a position to make sure that unless someone comes in and says, I just, raped a goat and I'll do it again.
Sure. Yeah.
I
The
guess,
classic.
it just, anyhow, I guess my point is it would be hard pressed for me to not try to fight for someone not being this
You want to try to exact a positive influence while you are
correct
in there. Okay.
Because as you know, Jake,
Mhm.
When you're a witness, it's not just, it envelops every aspect of your life. And so,
Right.
and that's why everybody has a hard time ripping away from it. And what's
Yeah.
left is a very deep hole sometimes. And I guess my point is, I think life is better. Again, I'm coming from a perspective that I believe there is a God. But I think life is better, even if you're not in the ideal place, that you can make it as ideal as you can without upsetting the apple cart around you.
Right.
I do feel like, even though when I was out and I wasn't disfellowshipped or I wasn't apostate, and so I had an association, there definitely was a tendency for people to avoid family members, this, that, and the other. And so I do think everything kind of, my life flows better, being a witness. And again, my view is I'll give back by hopefully being in a position one day to help others. So, and that's where I come at it from Franz's position. I think he was an incredible position that probably never be there again. Perhaps, I don't know. So.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I think it would probably be the process they have in place really self-selects for narcissistic personalities.
Yeah.
So I think by the time you get to a point where you're being considered to be a governing body member, you are being considered to be a governing body member because of your absolute allegiance to the status quo and not shaking things up. So I think, I kind of agree with you.
He had that crisis of conscience while he was there. You couldn't have it. It would be hard, I should say, to have it and then get there.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it was almost too much for him. He probably just.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to, if you don't mind getting into a bit of back and forth. That's okay. So what I'm thinking of from my perspective, because I've talked to a lot of people over the last year or so that I've been out, who feel like they want to, a lot of elders specifically feel like, well, I'm an elder. I can try and, at least in my congregation, be a counterweight to the other side, which makes sense to me. And I had that thought too when I was having my own crisis of faith.
Mhm.
I think the thing that was hard for me was, and for me specifically, my conscience wouldn't allow me to preach things that I thought were actively harmful.
Mhm.
And so preaching is so intertwined with being a witness, especially as you get, privileges, preaching from the platform or encouraging other young brothers or whatever it is. And if I have a problem with the governing body, I don't feel comfortable being in a position where I constantly have to preach how important it is and how much we need it. And we should be appreciative of X, Y, and Z. And, when I started to turn down assignments because I was like, okay, well, maybe I can make this work with my doubts, I realized there were fewer and fewer things that I felt comfortable actually talking about. And I think it was just too detrimental to my mental health to keep on trying to progress or stay where I was, because I was a servant at the time. But I can understand the other point of view. So that's kind of my, I guess, defense of Raymond Franz, is that in the leadership position now, it would be completely different now. I think even if somebody did wake up now, they would be like, well, I'm just going to ride this train until I die, because if I leave, everybody has seen my face and knows exactly who I am. And people like Jake are going to bother me for, YouTube content and stuff. So it would be different. But I think, for him to be in a leadership position where when he doesn't even necessarily think that the leadership that exists should exist, I think would be pretty hard. And so I guess that's, to somehow formulate that into
No,
a question.
and I had to deal with that in my mind too. And I do get it. The only thing is, I guess I would revert to the the idea that to begin with, you can be selective in your ministry, so to speak. Meaning you don't necessarily, you're not going to see me, um, have 10 studies or anything like that and trying to pull in everybody. That said, I do think that on a case by case basis, some people may or may not, maybe in my, you'd have to make that judgment call would they be better off, in
Yeah.
the organization, does it help their life? Does it provide some amount of structure? Because there are some positives. You can't, Joe's Witnesses target people that don't make a lot of money, in reality, aren't as educated. But the flip side is they give them, perhaps in a lot of cases, better lives than they would have otherwise had. I do believe that because I've seen it to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it can, I guess my counterpoint to that would be like, I think if a Mormon showed up at their door at that
Mhm.
right
But I would
moment,
agree with
whenever it
that.
was, and
I
had the
would,
right pitch,
yep,
I think it is the need of structure and community that is drawing people in,
correct.
who kind of fit that demographic, which I would agree that's kind of who are aiming for. And I think that this is like, even though, yeah, that's a good question. Like, do I think that being a part of that, the JW community and structure, is a part of not having that? Yeah,
Well, let
I
me
don't
ask you
know.
this.
I don't
Do
know
do
the
you do
answer.
you think it impacted your childhood at all?
My childhood? Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it affected it a
In a
great
positive
deal.
way or a negative way?
No, I think it was all negative the way it
Oh, it was?
affected
Okay.
my
Okay.
childhood personally.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
not that I was abused or that I um, have a great deal of trauma. Like my dad was an elder, and my
Yeah.
my mom pioneered for a little bit, but I had very loving parents, had a great family, and I think being part of like my family, I really liked my family,
Mhm.
and they were all witnesses. So like in that sense, I did have a positive impact growing up by my family, but all the things that were specific about Jehovah's Witnesses, I think, were negatives. Like
Okay.
the Armageddon narrative was more harm than good. Like it didn't provide a sense of like urgency to my life. It just made me feel like any small failure could jeopardize me getting everlasting life.
Mhm.
Or, if Armageddon came tomorrow, would I make it?
Mhm.
Because, oh, I just made this mistake today. So it
Mhm.
kind of feels like all the other stuff didn't really matter. And it, obviously ostracized me from experiences that I now, as an adult, wish I had had.
Mhm.
So I think
Okay.
all of the things that are specific about the witnesses, I feel like are almost entirely negative.
Okay. Okay. No, and I guess it is circumstance by circumstance. So, like I was just with someone just a minute ago. He was a he was a meth. He was a dad of two kids, and he was into meth. And he was just sharing with me. I had a coffee with him, and just sharing with me about how it changed his life. And so just, I guess I'm coming from hearing that and just thinking about
Yeah,
how
sure.
much it's going to benefit their kids now, not having a dad that's fully engrossed in meth. So it just, there are times
Yeah.
I get it just it is circumstantial. um uh,
And to just be clear, this
yeah.
is all with reflection and hindsight, because certainly
Yeah.
at the time I thought that I I didn't think like, oh wow, I hate being a witness and this is affecting me negatively. Like if I had been interviewed on a circuit assembly a couple years ago, I would have said, oh, I don't have any regrets. My only regret was not pioneering sooner, or whatever
I
people say
see.
on the stage. But with reflection, a lot of the issues that I have now, I realize were because of a lot of the like fear mongering that's at a lot of at the core of the doctrine, which is
Yeah.
that you might die if you mess up too much.
Yeah. No, and and yeah, I had parents, just so I'll say this, I have parents that they were diehards, my mom especially, but there was a there was a there was something about them, like I don't feel like they pushed me to a point that maybe a lot of witness families do. They didn't, when I didn't choose to be a pioneer and I decided to get into more of a career, they were generally okay with it. I mean, they were.
Yeah.
And I would say even if I got disfellowship tomorrow. So here's the thing: my mom and my dad know how I feel. Everything I'm telling to you, I've told to them, and they
Gotcha.
know. So
I think, yeah, I mean, I would actually agree with that as far as my parents' attitude. Like, I didn't actually feel pressured to like go to Bethel or Pioneer
right,
necessarily, as long as I was doing something in the religion. I
right,
think
right,
they were pretty happy
yeah,
and supportive. So that's I would agree with you there. It really um became to me like, am I preaching something that is benefiting society or that is a detriment to it? Like, not just
yeah.
necessarily for the individual.
I think it
Because
depends on
like,
what you focus on, though. It depends on partly what you're focusing on. And if you're focusing on if you believe in God and you believe in Jesus and all that, then I
well, I
suppose
did at the time.
yeah, but you could create a narrative that was, trying to leave, which is what I do, is trying to leave, the term governing body out of it, But and so I really have a little bit different kind of message than I'll tell you what.
Yeah, I understand.
When I first was coming back recently, I started giving comments that were edgy as hell.
Yeah.
And I got complimented on it. I couldn't even believe it. Like the other day, we had just little tidbits. I'm sitting here talking with one of the most conservative elders you've ever. We had him over for dinner, and we're talking at the end and the term evolution. And I said, I believe in evolution. And my wife looks at me, and it's like giving me the no, don't go there. And I went into a whole little discourse on what the term means and why it can associate with creation and all that. I did it in a very tactful way, and yeah, I'm still
Yeah.
here. And
Yeah, well, hey, that's no.
you know,
I actually I experienced that too. Like, I felt like once I was like more selective as to what I felt I could comment on, and was trying to like sneak in a little criticism there. People always seem to like it a little bit,
yeah, yeah.
Which is what, like you said earlier. I think if the organization was more willing to admit their past mistakes, like and be very open and honest about what their issues are now, I think that the membership would like it, appreciate it,
Yes.
because I always felt like whenever I felt like I was getting transparency, I felt very reassured by that.
Mhm.
And it was, a lot of my resentment when I was, I would call waking up, when I was realizing that I do not agree with this group. I don't think they have the truth, was kind of resentment over the fact that they had painted over a lot of the
Mhm.
stuff and were painting certain issues out to not apply to them. Uh, so I do understand that.
There,
Yeah,
there.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say there is a little bit of a quiet. When I watched the Jeffrey Jackson interview at the Australian Royal Commission, it
Yeah.
just seems so different than if I felt a governing body helper was being questioned. And one of the interesting things after watching that interview or questionnaire, I kind of wondered, who is them? Wouldn't it be
Mm.
interesting if them really wasn't them? I don't know. I know I'm not trying to go far field on
I
this.
don't know what you mean, though. What do you mean? Like,
Okay, well, you got the governing body, but then you got the organization. And is the
mhm,
organization having these policies and all this? I mean, who? The question is, if you were to really separate the governing body members out and ask them about themselves, what would their answers
mm,
be compared to what gets printed and approved and written by the people who write it at Bethel? And so it's an interesting disconnect. I wonder if it exists, because it definitely seemed like the answers he was giving wouldn't have been, if another witness was giving those answers, they may have had a judicial committee.
yeah, right. So, yeah, no, that's interesting, because like
And
there was that one question where like Angus Stewart, the guy questioning him, like really hammered him on like
oh yeah,
corporal punishment. Do you guys in your
yeah.
publications encourage spanking, or have you ever? And they definitely have.
And the
But he
question
just
mark.
said, not personally, no.
Yep.
I was
And
like,
then,
oh,
well, and then the question of, more importantly, the question of, are you guys the only
oh yeah, channel that God
channel?
is using or
Oh, well,
whatever.
that would be presumptuous. Well, my goodness, you're presumptuous all over the map when in the literature.
Right. Yeah.
So the question is if you were to really interview those people, and when you get a background, like when you read Franz's book and you get a background on the personality types of the different governing body members, and you definitely can see who's like a sheep follower versus the people leading the
Right.
group. And the question is Tony Moore sitting there being a strong man? And I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
I just it would be really interesting to dissect it. And
I
so,
know. I
but a
want
lot
like
of
a secret recording to come out just so I know what
yeah,
the
yeah,
dynamic is in the room. I'm just curious.
yeah. But I don't know. I wonder if the organization is more organized than its own good would
Oh,
dictate.
probably. Okay, so let me challenge you on a couple things. Let me
Yeah.
think about this
Okay.
because like the thing that I got to a point where like I couldn't reconcile
Okay.
was ironically one of the biggest things was shunning
Right.
and just realizing like this is really cruel that we use fear in this way, and knowing that there have been people that have like committed suicide or whatever, and mostly just like feeling suicidal myself because I realized how worried I was about losing my family, like the impossible position I was in, um of being a loudmouth and a doubter. Just realizing like, and so and then I thought about the effect that this has on like closeted gay members
Mhm.
of the witnesses, and there's a high suicide rate in the LGBTQ community specifically because of not feeling accepted, not feeling like
Mhm.
there's a place for them, and beyond that, just the organization itself. Like I'm asking people to join a thing
Mhm.
that I don't agree with the structure with, and I don't think that the message is positive because it demands so much exclusion and so much fear
Mhm.
is integral to it. So,
Mhm.
are you doing kind of a like cost analysis in your head, or like some kind of math as to like, okay, I find this thing harmful, but I feel like it's counterbalanced by this? Like, how are you justifying certain things in your head?
Y so I y y broad stroke, yes. Small stroke, I have a lot of my friends who are disfellowshipped. I do not shun them.
Yeah.
I try to reach out to them, in fact. I don't, um I try to go out of my way in a lot of ways to touch base with them and know that, hey, still love them, care about them, and I don't practice it. So,
Yeah. So
um,
that's great, but you're one person among
mhm,
8 million. And even if you were one elder and you were the coordinator of an elder body, it would be one congregation against, however many 100,000 congregations there are.
mhm.
So, even if you are the best of a problematic bunch, like how much good do you think you can do in that position?
This is going to sound cliche, but it takes one at a time. The you, I do think that the wrong move by a lot of people is to leave. It would be better if they stayed, in my mind, and
Hmm.
changed. I do think in the same. I know this sounds grandiose, but the fact is that if more and more people didn't just straight up leave and just started behaving that the way that they would feel is right. Uh,
Well, wouldn't they be disfellowshipped? Like if they
well,
were, like if I was, and say like me and my friends in the organization who I know felt similarly to me, but I
no,
think we're like you,
I get it. It's
still
kind of
felt
like
like
why my image is out, right? If I felt that way, I turn on my image, I guess. The good
right.
stuff or
No,
the
no,
bad
I'm
stuff.
not saying that,
But no,
but like,
no, it's a good point. But except I don't, how many people do you know that have been disfellowship for talking to a disfellowship person?
well, I don't really know
Okay, well, because I
anybody, but I
don't.
guess what I'm saying is like if let's say you have. I mean, I've heard of multiple elders being deleted at a single time. It happened in our
Correct.
sister congregation,
Yep.
actually. So,
Yep.
like, if you had even like a body of elders who were like, you know what, we really feel like the message about, or what's a doctrine a lot of or like partaking at the memorial.
Okay.
Like, we feel like everybody should partake at the memorial. We don't see that there is a distinction in the Bible between people who should and should not partake, no matter what their resurrection hope is. So in our
And you're correct.
congregation,
Just so you know, I do feel you're right in what you're saying.
which that's, hey, you know what? I think I'm right too. I mean, I don't really care that much because now I'm kind of more agnostic. But when I was not, and I was more in your position of believing in God and in the Bible, I at least felt that way. And so they're like, okay, we're going to do that. I think the CEO is going to say, cool, I have to make a call to the branch real quick. I'll be right back. And he's going to come back and say, you're all deleted as elders. And then that will be announced at the next meeting by whatever elders are not converted. And then they're just, they're ostracized. Yep. They can keep coming to the meetings if they want. But if they want to preach what they think is true, then they're out of luck.
I think the difference is that you just have to keep some of that lower profile. It goes back to the Ray Franz thing, right? I mean, he didn't know what to do with his newfound crisis of conscience. I think if you actually were more covert or strategic and kept your mouth somewhat in check around the wrong kind of people and let it out. I know what I'm saying. What's the difference?
No, I get that because I feel like that's how I probably, lived for a while, even though maybe I wasn't necessarily consciously making that distinction. But I think that is how a lot of people do it. Like, they know, like, hey, around this group of friends, I can be a little bit more honest and hang loose. But if I'm hanging out with brother so-and-so, don't talk about X, Y, or Z.
Exactly.
So, I understand what you're saying.
And you might say, well, you're not being real to who you are. And I guess to my counter to that, well, if I left, what good is that going to do either? I mean, where can I do the most good? Now you have a YouTube video or YouTube channel, and you're, trying to get out there and do something proactive. But at the same token, when you pull people out, and this is where you and I might disagree, is like, I don't necessarily think their life's going to get better per se. It's like when I saw Lloyd do the whole everybody's happy video. I'm just like, just the fact that you had to do that video is almost in my mind.
We have similar opinions on the Lloyd. I mean, but I would agree with you. I actually said in a recent video that was in response to a watchtower they put out. One of the things that I resent about the way that they present criticism of the organization is that we're like trying to pull people out and accumulate followers for ourselves, like as if we're starting a different religion, which, to be honest, like the video you watched about like questions for Jehovah's Witnesses, was kind of the first video I made that I kind of aimed at, like, I'm going to present this as if I am talking to Jehovah's Witnesses, because most of the videos I do are really not about that. They're more about, they're for people who have no knowledge of the religion or who are, who have left or are in the process of leaving in some way, and kind of diving into something and trying to present Watchtower's best argument, and then showing, using their criteria, why it doesn't really hold up. So my goal is not really to pull people out, but I do think that people are happier if they have a more nuanced and informed view. And I think that, like, you seem like a pretty happy guy, and I think you have reached a point where you feel like you have a more nuanced and informed view on your faith. And like, to me, that's a win. I would like it if there were more people like you in the organization that were, aware of the issues with it, but wanted to enact a positive change. I do think that's better than nothing.
Yeah. There is an elder in our local congregation who feels the same way. I speak this way with him, and he is in that genre. There's more and more, to be honest. And
I found that too.
And he even used the term chemo with me one time. I was like, I was interested. And I was like, here's the thing. I think the idea of, Lloyd always likes to say he's an activist. I think you can be a greater activist on the inside, and I think you can promote better health for people. I hate to say this. There's no question it's somewhat a captive organization. I get it. I'm not blind to that. But the problem is you're in it, And if you could literally, if it was just you and no other family member, yes, maybe you could break away and it impacts you very little. But I think the fact is it's going to impact you a lot. And I think if enough people
No, it will.
decided to just stay in place but change their mindset, I actually think in the long term, you're going to fix the organization at some point. I may be completely off my rocker and thinking that, but
I understand what you're saying, and I think that that is an understandable and valid approach to a certain extent. I think what you are kind of asking people to do, though, and I understand your position, because like you're there, and it's like, well, I think first of all there's the individual just choice element of like, am I in a position, or do I have the bandwidth to like
right,
leave my family or not,
right,
or let them shun me? And I think the answer is that you can't control what other people do.
true, yeah,
But you can put the ball in their court.
right,
And I think it is a really tough ask when the main thing that is being stressed, from my perspective, is unity, and the importance of unity, and speaking in unison, um, following the governing body, even if we don't understand the direction. Ditto for the local elder body. If you don't understand a certain piece of organizational direction, just accept it and pray for Jehovah to help you understand it. It's really not a healthy way to live your life. And then if you add on top of that, you know that you don't really think that, but you're going to kind of go along with it, and then just breadcrumb and plant seeds of nuance throughout the course of your life as a Christian.
Mhm.
Then it's almost like you're living half a life. You're living half a truth. You're just sort of, you've put on a shell where you say things you don't necessarily believe, or gesture towards them anyway. But then you're also like hoping to change. To me, the best way to send a real message that the organization needs to change is for people who disagree with the leadership to no longer submit to them, and to leave.
Well, I
Now,
think,
not
yeah,
to form another religion necessarily, but
no, your comments are well made, and your points are well made. The
thank you.
difference is that I think the nuance is what um, I don't see anything. I don't think I do. Maybe I need to check myself more often, but I don't think I actually see anything that I don't believe is true. Now,
Oh, okay.
I may couch what I say. Um, I might include in a prayer, please help the governing body, and then I don't say get their act together.
Sure. You do want them to be helped. They might not agree
Yeah,
with
yeah,
the help that you're looking for. Yeah.
I guess, and I'm gonna let me revert to one other thing, and this is interesting because it's actually something that I noticed, and I meant to mention this too. Is again, I do believe in God, and I do have
Okay.
a relationship. I feel with the Creator, Jehovah, and that relationship is beyond what I do process wise, going to um, meetings and being all the technical things that a JW is. And that's something my parents, I think, instilled in me pretty well. And even when I wasn't coming and active as a witness, I still had that desire. I've read the Bible a lot. Um, and when I was actually watching Lloyd, John Cedars, the fact that he never touched on it was another little interesting point, because I was kind of curious how someone goes from being a witness all their life, supposedly having this relationship, to not having that relationship at all, and no one seems to ever touch on what that means for them. Nobody that leaves, and for me, it is real.
Future Jake cutting in again. I didn't really get a chance to follow up on a point that Russell made about what he perceived as Lloyd not really dealing with the relationship with his creator too much in his exiting process. So obviously, I can't speak for Lloyd's experience, and I don't think that's really necessarily the point at the heart of the argument that Russell was trying to bring up. I think what he was trying to say is, it seems like a lot of witnesses leave the organization and become atheists because they never took their relationship with Jehovah seriously. That's how I interpreted his question anyway. And I was going to jump on it, but then he kind of kept going for a while, and I put that one on the back burner and never got around to it. But I think it's worth bringing up, actually, because this is something I think is a little harmful that gets brought up a lot when you have people leaving a religion and becoming atheist or agnostic. It's one of those arguments that you hear from your believing family member and friends. But basically, I think what Russell is saying is we don't talk about the relationship with God enough or take it seriously enough as XJW activists. And that might signal the fact that we never really had a strong relationship with Jehovah. So my response to that is the organization kind of does that to itself. For them, God, Jehovah, is really shallow, and he is inextricable from the organization, to the point now where the publications will often just say, it's not about serving Jehovah, it's serving Jehovah and his organization. So they really make them one and the same, and they model Jehovah after the personality of the organization. So they claim to be very loving, but they're also incredibly exclusionary, a jealous God who demands exclusive devotion. And the relationship with Jehovah is not really deep. You know, the way that they say to get close to Jehovah is go to meetings, go out in service, informal witness, study our publications every day, and yeah, read the Bible every day too. But the way that you're supposed to meditate on the Bible is by meditating the way in which it reinforces Watchtower's doctrine. Basically, they make God really shallow, and when you deconstruct the organization, you're therefore deconstructing your relationship with God. And I think that's why a lot of XJWs end up going the atheist route. But I also think it's why most XJW content doesn't really focus on the relationship with Jehovah part of things. Anyway, that was kind of a long answer, but I did think it was a good point that he brought up, and I wanted to address it.
Now, I understand not everybody feels that way. I get it, and I'm trying to be respectful to that. But that's another aspect to the question, answer to the question you asked, because if I have those feelings where I do need to serve God or want to serve God, have that desire to, and I don't see any other organization that doesn't have some of these doctrinal issues that I can't live with, how else am I going to express it per se, other than just, going off on my own? So
why does it have to be through an organization, or do you
Well,
don't necessarily think it does, but you're kind of stuck in this one?
Yeah, I don't think it does. But I do think that obviously you get a clear sense from the first century that people met in congregations and groups that just didn't have that authority structure that they claim. That there was this governing body back then, which we obviously know is not. But but they did get together and associate, and so I guess I'm trying to mimic that. Not to throw doctrinal JW things back into the mix, but imagine for a second, they always say, well, from the point at which the latter part of the second century all the way to when, Charles Taze Russell decided to enlighten us all, there was this weird in-between time. Well, who's to say we're not technically still in that time, I guess.
Hey, right.
And if you are in that time, what do? You go be a Catholic or a Protestant or whatever it is that's around your corner. And it's funny how Jehovah's Witnesses still point to certain individual Protestants, for instance, that pioneered, different things and calling them true servants. And yet they would have done all sorts of things anti-JW. I guess in my defense, if you will, that I kind of view that I want to serve God. I do have a relationship with him, and therefore I'm doing the best I can until a day comes where maybe that's revealed otherwise. But that's kind of how I feel. I don't. But you're right. What's going through my background in my mind is, get out of her unless you want to share in her sins. So am I sharing in
no,
in their sins, or in the organization's sins? I guess I'm trying to remain separate. But yet I am one of them, and I'm in it. So, but I'm doing things differently. I don't shun. Going to your point, I have a really good friend who's actually gay, and he's not a witness or never was, but I go to lunch with him. I'm sure if they knew that kind of thing, they'd probably come talk to me. But
I think there's a lot of witnesses who disagree with
Yeah.
the organization's stance on that, and would be happy if they changed it. So that's interesting to me. Let me collect my thoughts for a second, because
Yeah.
I had a thing I was going to say, and
Okay.
now I don't remember what it is. Oh, okay, yeah. So for me, I also believed in God. I mean, really, up until like a couple months ago,
Mhm.
like I was really trying to be just, I guess, sort of like a left-leaning, non-denominational Christian.
Mhm.
I've got some friends in my life who are that way. One of the things, and lucky you, Russell, this is an exclusive. No, I'm just kidding. But I just realized I don't think I've actually ever talked about this, but this was a really big moment for me in my process of just like extreme cognitive dissonance. I hadn't been looking at anything online because I was much too afraid, but I kept on encountering little things that just made me think like, oh man, I'm really like button up against the doctrine. I don't know what it
Yeah.
is. I just felt like this isn't working for me, and I feel
Mhm.
disconnected from it. And one of the things I saw was just a tweet from somebody who was a gay Christian,
Mm.
and they tweeted something about how they reconcile that with what the Bible says. And I was reading this thread on Twitter, and I was like, that is so amazing. And I am terrified to check,
Mhm.
because best case scenario, I realize that the organization's wrong about how they interpret the Bible. And then I
Mhm.
disagree with them on this. And
Okay.
then I have to do something about it. And I think, like, for me, what would happen to me, and again, I really haven't talked about this, is that I prayed very fervently during the
Mhm.
process of me just like trying to process my doubts, my
Mhm.
dissonance. And I really felt like the answer from Jehovah that I got was that this is not the true organization. Like,
Mhm.
your concerns are well founded. Like,
Mhm.
the reason why you feel pulled in this direction is because I want you to look. I guess that's how I
I feel
felt.
so. I'd say the same thing. I'd say almost virtually
Okay.
the opposite. Yeah.
So you understand what I'm saying. So that's kind of how I felt, right? And
Mhm.
then I felt like, because I now know this, I do feel like I am going against God in a lot of ways. And I think that the thing that really uh, affected me that way, I mean, first of all, just like I was enough against the organization's stance on LGBTQ rights that I was like,
Mhm.
God can kill me in Armageddon. That's fine. I would rather be out uh, and supportive
Mhm.
than inside and promoting bigotry. So for me, I kind of didn't even care if I was right anymore. It's just like,
Mhm.
I think this is unhealthy. And if this is what God thinks, I disagree with him, and he can take that up with me. But I did reach a point where I felt like, I don't think God wants me to do this
Yeah.
anymore. So that was my experience. I guess I just wanted to share that.
No, no, I agree. Yeah,
But
yeah.
what is it about? Like, I don't know.
It
It's kind of interesting. Do you feel then? So you have looked into the Trinity a lot and all that.
I do. Yep.
So do you feel like the emphasis on like the divine name specifically is proper, like the amount of
No,
deference it's
no,
given?
no. I do feel that it is.
Okay.
There's actually a bunch of archaeological things in the first and second century where um, Christians that had died would put on their tombs specifically the divine name of Yahweh in Hebrew. They'd do it
Interesting.
alternating. And that was a very common thing to do. But that said, I think that Joe's Witnesses have taken an approach of dampening too much. I feel this way about Jesus' name. So, and use of Jesus. I think the idea was kiss the Son, lest God be angry. I don't. I think that we are focused on um, Jehovah more than first and second century Christians. Where I think a lot of
Yeah,
Jehovah's
probably.
Witnesses don't realize that the Bible, especially the Greek scripture, is the collection of what the apostles wrote, but there's a whole horde of first and second and third century Christians, even some mentioned by Paul, who were prolific writers of themselves, right? So you
Hmm.
can actually go today and see what's called the Church Fathers, broken up by the Nicene Creed. So all Church Fathers after the Nicene are anti-Nicene, and then Nicene Church Fathers, which are before 300, 325, and they were prolific writers. And yes, do they mention the Father? Did they mention Jehovah? Yes, but they mention Jesus, 5 times as much, 6 times. I don't know what it is. I'm just
Oh yeah, I mean it's
and I feel like we're exactly opposite, right? I think
oh yeah.
it's just and yeah, that's of note to me. I feel like we focus a bit too much. If there is such a thing, I still think obviously I think there is a Jehovah, and I think that his son is Jesus, but I think his point was to focus on Jesus. So I don't disagree with that.
Now as a and I pardon the term, I mean this only literally as a new atheist,
Yeah.
what is it about atheism that you bounced off of? Because I kind of did the same thing at first and now have come back around to it. I felt like I had to try on a different kind of Christianity before like landing back at like, yeah, no, I'm pretty sure I just don't see any evidence for God existing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I went into it with a mindset of, hey, maybe he doesn't, and I wanted to find out. I guess so.
Yeah, that's how I went into it at first. And then, yeah, I feel like I went on a kind of a back and forth journey.
Yeah. So where I went with it was, and I know what I'm going to say is very arguable. I'm sure everybody can argue the heck out of all this, but I would say that the same issues that Darwin had is the same issues that I would say I have. So a lot of people, in fact, I would say I'm a Darwinian evolutionist in the sense that I believe very similarly to Darwin, where there is such a thing as irreducible complexity in evolution, and
Okay.
that there is problems in the scientific record related to the Cambrian explosion, that being a near impossibility if you believe in progressive. And more importantly, I think the original life issue is a particularly problematic. I was reading a book by recent book by the astrophysicist. Man, his name went right out of my head. But anyhow, he made a reference to the fact that through a process yet to be discovered, chemical things in the ocean got together and formed this light. And it's basically
You're talking about like abiogenesis.
yeah, and it was basically a statement of faith. It wasn't a statement of reality. I mean, we know all the chemical compounds on the earth. In fact, we actually feel that we can guesstimate what all chemical compounds are almost in the entire universe. And so just by, even though we don't know them, we know of them. And there isn't any scientific rationale to suggest that you can get life from those processes. And there hasn't been for a long time, and yet it's been studied for. I guess overall, I started checking off these things like these are in my book absolutes. And now I'm throwing God in the gaps, right? I realize that I'm
Yes.
taking and I'm putting God in place of not having the answer. So I get that, but at the same token, now we come back to how much sense things make. I could be here for a long time talking about it.
Sure, yeah. I guess I introduced the general concept of like, why do you believe in God's existence?
No, my grandfather was a professor at the University of Washington for all his life, mathematics and fluid mechanics, and then he got into other areas. And he and I would talk ad nauseum over these issues. And though he went to every meeting in his life, he never became a Jehovah's Witness, never got baptized, and but he believed in God, and he never let that known in the university. And he and I spoke about it. He took it from the approach of the mathematical equations necessary for some of these things to be true. It starts to stack on top of itself. And what happens is, like any side that speaks a lot, whether it be Dawkins or lots of the other popular atheists, they talk from a position. And they talk from the position they want to speak about, but then they skip over all the other problematic elements of what they believe. And I feel like they're disingenuous when they do it, and that's where I look at like Anthony Flew, who spoke one way, one part of his life, another way, another part of his life. And you go, well, isn't he disingenuous? Well, I think he honestly kind of came around to realizing that there are problems in that thought process. And,
yeah, I mean, I guess,
yeah,
like you're saying, it's a general, it's a lot more than like scientific gaps in things. I mean, frankly, I don't know a lot about Dawkins. Like I did read one of his books, but I just I find him to be generally kind of a repellent person currently, so I don't like keep up with like, what he's doing these days. There's not a lot of like, I don't know, atheist thought leaders that I really know of or follow or anything. I just kind of reached like for me, I had gotten to a point where I had a real issue with, taking the Bible literally, just from a like, I read a lot of Bart Ehrman myself, and both from a like historical perspective and from a science perspective, from a moral perspective. I just didn't like the reading of the Bible, and when it comes to an interventionalist God, I couldn't possibly reconcile that in my head. Like I just felt like, if God is a sentient being who can fix issues and yet doesn't, then I couldn't find a version of that I was okay with. And so I just kind of was like, God is just like, I don't know, the force or something. Like it started to become so like abstracted that I realized that it was basically no difference as to whether or not I believed in God at all. Like I had made God almost non-existent. So I was just like, I don't really know why I'm clinging on to this God shell anymore.
Although I think on that argument, and I understand it's a big one, I would say that, it's kind of one of these things where you take and you judge the Bible based on the literal things that it says, even though it itself doesn't say, hey, take this literally. In fact, honestly, it says it takes it figuratively in a lot of different areas. But the other thing,
I guess literally isn't the right word. I guess I would say like cohesively, like interpreting the Bible as the literal, as the infallible word of God, as in some
and that's
way.
Something we attribute. We say that, right? An infallible word of God. It doesn't ever say itself is infallible, but because I do believe that there are errors in copying and all sorts of things that Bart talks about. But coming back real quick, to the morality side and suffering and allowing of suffering and interventions. If you were to judge all that based upon the quote plan, if you said the Bible was a plan, the end result will be God doesn't allow that, right? And the end result will be that all those things are done away with, and that all the suffering and all that is never even thought of. So the in its own defense, right? It's kind of like we're judging it based upon a partial point in time.
Well, right. That's what watchtowers, try their attempt to get out of jail free card is like, well, yeah, he's letting all the babies die now. Yeah, he's gonna bring them all back. So it's like, yeah, he kind of unkills them. And it's like it didn't really count. That sorrow you went through, you kind of forget about it. So I don't know. Like there's a lot of workarounds that they have. You know what? I'm realizing I want to ask you, and I am aware if you need to hop off at any time, just let me know. Maybe within the next like 15 minutes or so, we can kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
Keep this at a reasonable length. But this has been really fun, first of all. And I also want to say, just to, I don't know, to my audience or something, like I'm probably going to, just so people actually watch this, I'll probably have some clickbait title to it and make it sound like it's a debate, but it hasn't been, and it's just been a good conversation, and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, me too.
Good. Okay, so the thing that I had more of an issue with than like the idea of the kingdom and God, all that stuff is good. I would love all the badness to be wiped away, suffering gone. I can get on board with that. What I had a lot more trouble with were the more step-by-step guides to like, okay, the Great Tribulation, that's going to be a period of time that happens, and we know we know because of this. Yeah. This means the United Nations, and they are going to, fell Babylon the Great in the sense that they will somehow come together and eradicate every religion in the world. And then witnesses will be the only one standing, and then we will be in bunkers for a while. And then there will be Armageddon, and that war is very, like, I don't know, like the depiction of everything. Mm-hmm. And the Russia is the king of the North, and those really specific claims that take Bible imagery and chronology and like specifically apply it to future events and Jehovah's Witnesses and stuff. I mean, how do you feel about those things? Like, is Russia the prophesied king of the North in your opinion?
Oh man, that's
I won't make fun of you if you
No,
say
if
yes.
you, well,
I promise.
I'll say this though. If you had asked me that, because I remember thinking that late '90s. Oh my God, that's laughable. And even the late 2000s, it just feels like Russia has just been irrelevant for so long as far as a power, and all of a sudden they're kind of doing similar. But I let me answer one thing real quick. Is this
Okay.
the specific nature of all those prophecies? I think the society gets themselves way out over their skis on.
I would agree.
and I think that they would do far better trying to be a bit more, this is what we think, but we don't know. And if you have a different opinion, I think the society in general, most religions at some point decide, hey, these are the things that are dogmas in our church. Or our organization. These are the things that unify us. It's the belief that there is a Trinity, and the belief that they're blah 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 blah. And they create a number of points that are, these are the hard and fast things that make us who we are.
Right.
And it feels like Jehovah's Witnesses just go, you have to believe everything we say, and and it's just all
Yeah.
encompassing. And so then when they go out over their skis like this, it's like, and then they're changing their mind and they're making adjustments, or things don't work out the way they think it is. Obviously,
Yeah.
and this and that. And so yeah, I think they look pretty foolish. But to your specific question, I will say, without in a very generic way, there's no question I do see some of the things happening in the world that are oddly similar to what I was taught as a child.
Similar to what you were. So you feel like witnessing things you were taught as a child, or
yeah. Well, no, I'm just saying, if you had went back in service, if I had gone back, if I went back to 2004 or 3, or even what I did, and started telling people about how bad the world is, I remember they looked at me and said, a lot of times they just say, I don't think the world's that bad. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
Kind of
true.
like the conversation stopper. Now you don't have to. You merely suggested, and
Yeah, sure. You don't have to convince anybody that things are terrible.
And more importantly, it's kind of like, all the things like, in fact, there was just a Gallup poll or something that was researching how many people still believed in God or view themselves as atheists and all that, and it's rapidly changing. We're in the last 5 years, it's basically tanking the number of people that associate with any kind of religious group, and who now.
Yeah, that's the number that I've seen going down, is the number of people who are like specifically affiliated, but the number of people who believe in God really hasn't gone down much more than like 2% or something.
Yeah, but wouldn't you expect it a little bit? Then I don't know. I just think that it's a trend, and by percentage, if you looked historically, those numbers had stayed pretty stable for the last 200 years. Obviously, they didn't necessarily poll people 200 years ago, but I think, principally speaking, the world definitely was a religious place to be.
Yes.
And ultimately, I can see a day and age coming where, religion is considered, we need to get rid of religion. I see all those things coming. And now, do I think they're soon? No, I don't necessarily think that. Do I see, kind of a pushing and shoving between the United States and Russia? No question. Soviet Union. So prophecy is a touchy subject. I think anybody that goes out and tries to say this is what it means is always going to look foolish at some point, and that's probably what they need to learn. But to your point, and I apologize, I'm answering it in a roundabout way.
No, that's how I answer every question. So I understand.
There's no question that I see certain things that, in my mind, are oddly similar to what I was told. So,
okay. I guess, yeah, I do understand that. I've been thinking lately that I picked a pretty curious time to decide to leave a doomsday group, because it seems, I think there's plenty of atheists out there that are like, yeah, the end of the world will probably come.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, what's funny is, climate scientists have been very accurate about predictions about where the world is heading as well. And in some cases have actually overestimated the amount of time that certain things have had. And, none of that has to do with religion or God or
But it's
anything. And
paint out of fear, right? People start to get, honestly, if they start getting hit from all sides. See, I will say this: the world is getting hit from all sides. It was never going to be one issue because people can compartmentalize things. But if all of a
Mhm.
sudden you're dealing with climate, you're dealing with politics, you're dealing with countries, you're dealing with religious issues, you're dealing with this, you're dealing with that, it does start to add up. I mean, imagine, like you said, climate. Well, it's not just the sea rising; it's all of a sudden food shortages. All of a
Mhm.
sudden, there's impacts that are way beyond just, climate's a big issue, right? I mean, that is going to be very significant, whether it's the storms are having versus and people simply being able. If we're starting to have, if we have any food shortages where we live, it means somewhere else in the world people are just straight up dying. And
Right, right.
we're on the cusp of that. And then the second people start dying, what happens? They start rioting. Things start. It can go downhill fairly quickly. I do, and if anything, like you just said, even atheists are saying it. I mean, there's
But
this general feeling like things are bad. We're
that's
really.
true. But I guess the difference is that, the groups like uh, Watchtower, and they're not the only group like this. Right? I don't want to
Right.
isolate them specifically, but what they kind of do in response to that is, instead of saying, therefore, let us try to improve life as much as possible, how do we organize our group
Mhm.
to become little local climate change activists and start to enact some changes in our area? And how do we organize our group so that, we can make sure that X, Y, and Z happens in our community? What they do is they withdraw people from the community into
Mhm.
an isolated community that does not get involved in politics or with their neighbors in a substantial changed way. And then they don't contribute to society changing or improving anyway. And then they say, aha, look, society is getting worse. But they're not actually trying to improve it. They're just trying to preach about how bad things are getting and
I'll
are
go one
going to
step further.
get.
I'll go one step further. They're rooting for the destruction of it. I mean,
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting towards.
I
It's almost like it
yeah.
kind of creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. And, I
Yeah.
think that the issue with religion specifically is that it is it is not so much that I think that there's a decreased belief in God, but I think the more communication we have and the more visibility we have on institutions, the more people can see that institutions like this are very similar, not really needed, um, or
Yeah.
they don't see a particular need to join.
Well,
Um, but yeah, I guess all these things can be kind of explained by secular means. And my counterpoint would be like, yeah, but I think things would be a lot better if all the religious people stopped putting their effort into converting people and started, trying to get people to vote and community organize.
and that thought will become more prevalent. Bart Ehrman is in particular. In most of those books, he talks. He always counters. So mainstream Christianity, the oh man, the Bible belters, if you want to call them that.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Because they kind of have this view of what Jesus is, and he always tries to remind them he always believed in the end of the world. He was
He was an apocalyptic Jewish
yeah,
preacher. Yeah.
and he goes into great length to try to explain that this guy was not sitting there saying he was bringing peace to the earth and this blah 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 blah. And so I guess to that point, we may be. I do see evidence in the world that that's what's going on right now. It's rapidly happening. So I don't. Yeah.
It's not happening that rapidly though, because Jesus was saying that, and that was thousands of years ago.
No, not from when he said it, but when.
No, but he
Yeah.
said that it was going to happen, within the lifetimes of his apostles, and they certainly all would have understood it that way at the time.
I think they understood. I don't think he said it. I think that he understood it that way. But yeah, and you're right, and that's evidence even in. There was in fact, funny thing, and just this might be a geeky thing to say, but there was a dialogue with Justin Martyr and Typhro, which is there was written. Justin Martyr was a disciple of John the Baptist, but they were writing back and forth. Typhro was a Jew, and Justin was a Greek, I think. and they were talking, and Typher was asking when the end of the world was going to happen, and Justin Martyr was like, well, it could be as long as 200-300 years from now. And it's just, obviously now we're right. So there was this mindset, even though he was saying 200 or 300 years back in the early part of the second century, and now we're a couple thousand almost away, or 1800. But that's true. But it, at the end of the day, if it happens, it happens. I mean, I don't. Anyhow, it's a tough thing to say isn't progressing, because it seems like something's happening. But
I guess I think that every generation kind of thinks, well, things can't get any worse than this from a certain perspective, and the end kind of keeps on not happening. And so to me, like, I guess my wish for groups like this would just be to try and make the world more tangibly better for as many people as possible while we're here. And like, I obviously the witness counterpoint to that would be what we do. We preach the good news of the kingdom. And it's like,
they also have about the little emergency, you better believe they're down in that hurricane with their little outfits on. If you see people changing a light bulb, it's definitely Jehovah's Witnesses.
Exactly. I was about to say, like, how about, do food drives, open up the kingdom halls more for disaster relief. Like, if they were engaged in more of that kind of positive community building, I wouldn't necessarily be as vehemently against it. But
I'm getting more into it, I have to admit. I mean, when I was a kid, they didn't have anything like that. So they are getting a little bit more.
I guess what I need to do is try and get governments to give incentives for churches to be nicer. Yes. And then if Watchtower realizes that they'll get money for being nice, then they will do it.
Well, here's another point to your whole issue. Environmentalists, they're very all their new buildings are supposed to, net zero type stuff they're trying to push. And
it makes them easier to sell when all of these things are they got to sell a building. They're going to want to.
Or it makes them off-griddable, so that way in Armageddon they still somehow survive.
Oh boy!
Yeah. Because God needs a movie studio.
God really needs it. He doesn't need it super soon. Even though the end's coming, he's like, that can be finished up after Armageddon. That's fine. That land will still be pretty much untouched, be unraised by the meteorites. Well, this has been really nice, Russell. And this is I if you're ever up for it, I would be interested to talk to you more.
Absolutely.
Now that we have more of a starting point, I imagine it might have been frustrating for people to listen to sometimes, like, because sometimes I bet they were like, oh, you should ask me about this, and this.
Yep.
But I was just more interested in, kind of letting you talk and getting a sense of where you're at and how you reconcile all this. And it would be interesting to have you back and kind of, I don't know, grill you a little bit more.
No, it's fine.
Why was I so nice to you? What's wrong with me?
I agree. But this, like you said, you can be more direct next time. I
won't be mean, but
no. And to your point, and I'm sure you'll have more questions later. But I understand the other side. I do get it.
Yeah, it does seem like you've done your homework at least. Although I beg of you to watch other channels that aren't Lloyd's. There's even Christian SJWs. I don't know what you think of them, but
I've watched quite a bit, and actually I think that's how I learned about you. It was your interview with Lloyd. And
that you can't find that anymore.
We can't.
No, I won't get into that. But this is really wonderful, and thank you for being very open and honest with me. Yeah. And hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely. No, awesome. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks so much. Yeah. So that was the conversation, and I thought I would do a little post. I thought I would do a little post-mortem now that it's over. So this is actually the second interview / debate / conversation with a witness that I recorded. And the first conversation that I recorded, the witness actually got back to me and said, I don't want you to release it. And it was really stressing them out. So I agreed. I was like, okay, I will shelf it. And, I kind of tried to throw out there like, well, I can obviously just alter your voice. And at the time we did the interview, the person wanted to show their face. which I advised against. So I was like, I can blur your face and alter your voice. And they were like, still, no, I don't think I can do it. So this is now my second conversation. But it's the first one you're seeing. But I thought I would talk a little bit about the commonalities I saw between these conversations, specifically the one you saw, and what we can learn about talking with our Jehovah's Witness friends, family, or people we meet out in the fields of planet Earth. So in the conversation that you didn't see and that I can't show you, but I promise exists. Actually, I'll show you a little clip just so you know at least it happened.
So man, I would say I'm on your same side. I do want to find the truth to these issues. I'm open to
I'm going to challenge you on that because I don't think you do.
Okay, let's go.
So one of the things that this person brought up that I see a little bit of with Russell is that I would say that when I was doubting, I couldn't find a satisfying answer to X, Y, or Z. Let's say it was the LGBTQ issue or the 607 issue or Noah's flood. And he would say, oh, but there are answers to these things. I wish I could, articulate these things. And what he didn't seem to understand is that just because there is an answer to something doesn't mean that the answer is satisfying or makes sense. And that was one of the things that I was butting up against the most. And it's interesting thinking back to the conversations that I had with my family when I was trying to articulate my reasons for leaving. This is what I would butt up against this with them too, is I would explain why I disagreed with a thing. And they would say, but why didn't you research all these articles we have? Or why didn't you tell us? We could have helped you with this. And they didn't seem to get it. Was like, no, I know what the answer is according to the organization. And my problem is I don't like this answer. It doesn't work for me. So I thought that was really interesting. And I think that that's something that I might try to emphasize more in the future if I'm ever interacting with any witnesses IRL or like just in videos I make that are more geared towards witnesses, focusing on the fact that like, yes, the Watchtower has an answer for this. This is their answer. This is why their answer doesn't work for me. Anyway, the other person I talked to also left the organization for a little bit. The other person wasn't disfellowship. They just kind of faded, tried out some other religions, have much like Russell read all of the apostate material, like read Crisis of Conscience and In Search of Christian Freedom, and also like Russell, basically disagreed with Raymond Franz on some things, particularly their decision to leave. So that was an interesting commonality. And I think also in both cases, they were able to reconcile their doubts / issues with their pre-existing beliefs. So the other person I talked to had an issue with the structure of the governing body. And I think specifically the not inspired or infallible thing. Like he recognized that we have to trust these people implicitly, but also we have to accept that they're infallible, accept that they are fallible. And how are we going to differentiate the perfect direction from the imperfect direction? I won't get into it, but basically this person was able to find an answer that made sense for them. And this seems to be the thing that I was hearing with Russell as well, as like he seemed to recognize that there was all these issues with the organizational structure, but he was able to find a way where he can justify continuing to be a Jehovah's Witness while also having that particular doubt intact. Like, okay, I can in my heart and in my head disagree with this, but we're still unified in the same doctrine. I still think this is the best and most correct religion. What that tells me is the notion of there needing to be one true religion or the restoration of first century worship is a really powerful point that Watchtower has. I think this must be quite effective for them, which is why they emphasize it a lot. And it really does seem to stick with the witnesses that I've talked to. Certainly throughout my waking up process, all my friends and family, and now with the witnesses I've been talking to for this interview, what would have been a series, but now it's just one. The notion of there needing to be an organization, of there needing to be this collective, how do they say it in the New World Translation? Like, don't forsake the gathering of one another. That talking point seems to have a real hold on people and make them feel that it is correct, even if it is not necessarily healthy, or like that it is generally the best structure, even though there are some issues with the structural integrity. So that's kind of interesting to me. And I think what I'll take from that is like, I need to actively break that down a little bit more on the channel. I really haven't gone into that because my sense is that it's been covered really well by a bunch of other channels, but it seems like it is something that might be worth digging into a little bit more. So I'm going to take that with me as well. Hopefully this will lead to more conversations. I had a really nice time talking with Russell, and I hopefully will have him on again, and we can have maybe more of an actual debate where I can hold his feet to the fire a little bit more. If you like this and want to see more stuff like this, let me know, or let me know in the comments what I can do differently or what I can improve on.